Kenda, thank you very much for helping us reimagine what can be. It's helpful, it's challenging. Your presentations reminded me of the research recently completed by the Center for Religion and Civic Culture of USC. They studied religious innovation, how leaders of various religious traditions, Christian and non-Christian, and people that would say they're not of faith, are reimagining their task, their mission in the world. All of the groups studied were reimagining the task of living out their faith, their commitments, in the diverse environment that is Los Angeles, and to a lesser extent, Seoul, which was the other city that was part of the study. As they studied reimagined communities and innovations in thinking and mission of the church and other religious institutions, I see a lot of links to what you've been talking about. Clearly, the issues you raise go beyond the need for the church to be faithful and touch something deeper in how we think about being people of faith in a diverse, multilingual, multicultural, multi-religious environment. So I want to invite us to discern the sign. You invite us to discern the signs of the times and point ways that followers of Jesus Christ can continue to be faithful to the call of the gospel and to invite others to faith. The types of models you describe, and which are also described in the work of CRCC, point to experiments born in a certain type of environment by certain types of people. The challenge of looking for Issachar, or of being a people like Issachar, is crucial. Yesterday, you challenged us to recognize that we cannot prepare blacksmiths for an age of cars. Today, you invite us to face the adaptive challenge of presenting our faith in such a way that makes sense to the next generation, particularly this group of millennials that you've described in a post-Christian environment. I want to draw on an article I wrote about the subject to connect to your presentation. How do we discover, and the title was Discover God's Initiatives in the Midst of Adaptive Challenge. I'd like to supplement what Kenda Dr. Dean has said by pointing to some of the ways we can discern the signs of the times. I want to point, first of all, to the fact that if we're going to be able to point to the signs of the times, we need to live in a sense of expectation. And I liked what you said at the end. We need to live in attentiveness to God. Too many of us are fearful. Too many of us are sure that this is the end. I did grow up in a dispensationalist framework, and we were always praying, Lord, come quickly, get us out of this mess. And I believe in the second coming of Jesus, but it's much more about, God, what are you doing today? Because of the challenges that we're facing and because of how complex they can seem to some of us, we can lose sight of the fact that this is God's work, not ours. We draw from the past, from the spiritual disciplines to make sure that we're attuned to God, that we're committed to follow Jesus Christ in this new environment, and that we seek to live into what God is doing in the world. And thank you, Pam, for that. I didn't have a chance to put it in here because I just saw it. So first of all, we need to be a people attuned to God, period. How are we developing our own following of Jesus Christ, developing our own sense of how God is working in us? Secondly, we need to think about where we are looking for God to be working. We've been rightly challenged to recognize that many traditional churches are not the places to look, at least not as presently structured. But where should we look? I suggest that there's several places. Previous models of revival and renewal, like Dr. Dean pointed to Martin Luther. What can we learn about how churches and leaders have responded to radical change in the past? I'm a historian at the end of the day. We do need to look at the past. What did we learn? How did churches seek renewal and revival in the midst of their adaptive challenges? Secondly, are we ready to look and learn from the vibrant churches of the South, of the global South? Are we ready to learn about doing ministry from the bottom up? Which is an important subtext in several of the experiments Dr. Dean points to. I think there's part of the challenge for us is that we assume we're at the center of all of this. And so all of what we're going to learn and do has to come from us. And maybe we need to reorient that and recognize that there's a lot of people that are really excited about their faith and are experimenting not out of need, not out of crises, but out of opportunity. That are experimenting out of abundance and new models and new places. Are we ready to look there as learners, not as the people who are at the center of the conversation? Are we ready to look into intercultural, transnational locations where people are encouraged, i.e. forced, to do things new, where we have to do things new. Third thing, we do need to be open to new experiments, which is a lot of what we've been hearing. I like the way our previous president framed it. As we look at some of these things, we have to ask, is this a church? It's an important ecclesiastical question, but I like that sense of fuzziness, that sense of, do we really need to draw that line? And yes, at some point, we are talking about being faithful followers of Jesus Christ. So there is some boundedness to this. But are we ready to work from a centered set model instead of a bounded set model? Are we ready to think about being the church of Jesus Christ as people looking to Jesus and not people that have gotten in a certain box that we define as, this is, if you're in the box, you're in. If you're not, you're not. So as we think about that, we can look forward to what? To these experiments of mashups that we have seen yesterday and today. I mean, there are all kinds of ways, and we could point to many more outside of this framing, but what are they all doing? They're mixing things that aren't supposed to fit together. Things that we have said are in separate categories, are in separate worlds, are in separate realities, and they're saying, what if? And why can't this fit with this? Well, only because we said so, only because we moderns who have handled and driven the conversation, we've got so used to categories and to fitting things into different boxes that we can't realize that maybe the boxes are our invention and not God's creation. And yes, one of the key places where we look is to youth and their enthusiasm and critique. We have to look there. We have to look to young people all over the world. But I would suggest we also have to look toward people who've had strong conversion experiences, who haven't figured out that God's present, but they haven't figured out that they're supposed to look like this church thing. And so they know God and they know they want to follow Jesus. They just haven't learned the rules, and maybe we need not to teach them the rules. I would suggest we can also look to migrants and immigrant millennials. One of the dynamics of immigrant millennials in the West and around the world is that they're usually fairly spiritual dynamic. There's a strong spiritual dynamic. They're pretty flexible. They have to be. If you're a person in movement, you have to be flexible. They're polycentric. They know how to deal with various environments all the time. And they're ready to adapt to new realities because that's what a person who's in movement does. You survive, you thrive, you can hope for the future. Why? Because you're ready to change. Of course, these people are breaking all the kinds of molds. They're breaking the mold of the nation state, which Protestantism is largely built on, the concept of the nation state. So if we're going to do this seriously, we're going to find ourselves in situations where the categories that we have seen and have assumed are crucial and indispensable all of a sudden look kind of quaint. They do look like blacksmiths. Of course, on this end, we've been talking about youth, but I want to also talk about what I would call the discarded elderly. We live in a youth-oriented culture where we assume that people that are 80 years old can't think in new ways and can't draw the best of the past and look to the future, a future that they won't be a part of, but they're ready to plant the tree of whose shade and whose fruit they're not going to benefit. And so are we ready to share this kind of vision and yes, do those connections? And Kenda gave us some stories as we were having breakfast of how do you connect some of these things so that the elderly provide the wisdom, provide the stability, and the young people can dream. So some have visions and some dream, and we walk together. Are we ready to work with marginal people, those who aren't going to fit in seminary and the traditional categories that many of us have said are needed to do ministry? Are we ready to have an R&D department? Basically, you have an idea, we'll find some way, social capital, some emotional, spiritual capital, and maybe a little even financial capital. Go and experiment. And if you fail, that's what R&D is for. In fact, a good R&D department has a very high failure rate. Part of the way we've done ministry, and especially in more established denominations, is you can't fail. We've put too much into this. And I would say, no, we need to have models that say, go and fail faithfully. We need to learn. And so, of course, as a practical theologian, I'd say seminary needs to be practical theology, but that's a different discussion. And so this means that new and creative models of preparation for ministry and vocation, well beyond, and Kenda spoke kindly of Fuller as being at the edge of innovation. And on good days, I say I'm at the cutting edge, and on bad days, I go, this is the cutting edge. But we'll leave that one. And so how we deal with our ecclesiology. What does it mean to be the people of God? And so fourthly and lastly, we need to name the complexities of the journey. We need to celebrate the blacksmith ancestors and bless them, but recognize that that's not the future. We need to work on the margins with the undocumented, with those that have checkered pasts, and young people that are not going to easily fit in. We have to recognize that some of the things that we consider are indispensable about theological battles, about how we write things, young people are going, huh? Don't make sense. And we have to be very open to temporary models, to things that are going to work for a while, and we're going to give them a wonderful, beautiful eulogy because they worked, they did what they were supposed to do, and it's time for something new. As we discern the times, we will need to be open to ministry as constant experiment. The great thing is that the Lord always raises up a new generation of leaders. Dr. Dean invites us to use discernment to look in new places. I'm grateful for the challenge, and I want to invite us to continue looking, to use the skills of the tribe of Issachar. I'm enthusiastic with you, Dr. Dean, not because of Fuller or Princeton or any other institution will get it right, but because this is God's enterprise. Our task is to figure out where God is working and join the parade. Thanks be to God that this is God's parade.